Between 1945 and 1950, 5 people disappeared from the same small stretch of Vermont wilderness. A 74-year-old hunting guide, a college student, a war veteran, a 3-year-old boy, a woman out camping with her cousin. None of them were connected to each other. None of their disappearances were ever fully explained. You've probably heard this area called the Bennington Triangle, and you've probably heard it described as some ancient cursed patch of land. Here's what almost nobody mentions. That name is barely older than some of the people watching this video. By the end of this video, you'll know where that name actually came from, what happened to each person who vanished, and why one of them was eventually found in a place that had already been searched multiple times. This is the real story of the Bennington Triangle. Southwestern Vermont, around Glastenbury Mountain, doesn't look like the setting for a mystery. It's quiet, wooded, and unremarkable at first glance. But by the mid-1900s, the area already had a strange history behind it. Glastonbury and the neighboring town of Somerset had once been small logging and mining communities. By 1937, both had declined so completely that the state legislature officially unincorporated them. They became on paper ghost towns, still standing, but no longer functioning as towns at all. Then, in November 1945, Middie Rivers disappeared. Rivers was 74 years old, but he wasn't some inexperienced hiker. He was a professional hunting guide, leading 4 hunters through the area. Around Glastenbury Mountain in terrain, he'd walked for decades. At some point during the trip, he got separated from the group on the way back. He never rejoined them. Search efforts began almost immediately. Around 300 people, including soldiers sent from a base in Massachusetts, combed the surrounding woods. They found nothing. Not a boot, not a torn piece of clothing. Nothing that indicated which direction Rivers had gone or what had happened to him. A man who knew this terrain better than almost anyone else. Alive simply stopped existing somewhere inside it. Less than a year later, in December 1946, the case that would become the most famous of the group happened. Paula Jean Welden, a college sophomore, finished a shift at her school cafeteria and decided to go for a hike on the long trail near Bennington. She was seen along the trail, and witnesses reported she'd asked other hikers for directions at one point. After that, nothing. No trace of her was ever recovered. Paula's disappearance triggered one of the largest search efforts in Vermont's history at the time. Hundreds of volunteers joined the search. Her college temporarily shut down so students and staff could help look for her. Despite all of that manpower, searchers found absolutely nothing connecting her to any specific location. Trail or incident, 2 disappearances in 2 years, both in the same general area, both ending in searches that turned up nothing at all. On their own, these cases could be treated as isolated tragedies, the kind of thing that unfortunately happens in remote wilderness. But this pattern was only getting started. What made this area different from other places where hikers occasionally go missing wasn't just the disappearances themselves. It was how consistently thorough the searches were and how consistently they came back empty. After Paula Welden's disappearance, the area went a few years without another major incident. Then, between 1949 and 1950, it happened 3 more times, in cases different enough from each other that no single explanation fit all of them. In December 1949, James Tedford, a war veteran, disappeared under circumstances that remained genuinely strange. He was riding a bus back toward Bennington, and multiple passengers confirmed he was on board and accounted for at earlier stops along the route. Somewhere between those confirmed stops and the bus's final destination, Tedford was simply gone. His luggage was still on the bus. He was not. In October 1950, a 3-year-old boy named Paul Jepson vanished from his own family's farm while his mother was tending to their pigs a short distance away. A search involving Vermont State Police and Army units turned up nothing. Just 16 days later, Frieda Langer disappeared while hiking with her cousin near the Somerset Reservoir. This case is the one exception to the pattern, and it's arguably the strangest part of the entire story. 6 months after she vanished, her body was finally found near the reservoir, in an open area that had already been searched extensively multiple times in the months immediately following her disappearance. The area wasn't remote or hard to access. It had already had eyes on it, and yet nothing was found there until half a year later. Her body had decomposed too much for investigators to determine an exact cause of death. Taken together, these cases resist the explanation people most often want to reach for. A serial killer targeting an isolated hiking trail is a familiar story, but it doesn't hold up well here. The victims span an enormous range. An elderly professional guide, a college student, a war veteran on a public bus, a toddler on a supervised farm, and a middle-aged hiker. There's no consistent age, gender, or circumstance connecting them, which is exactly what you'd expect if a single predator were responsible. What's left is a cluster of disappearances that share a location and a rough time period, and very little else. Search efforts, staffed by hundreds of people and sometimes the military, consistently found nothing, except in the one case, where a body eventually turned up in a spot that had already been checked. That detail alone has kept this case open in the minds of investigators and researchers for over 70 years. Here's the part of this story that almost never gets told alongside the disappearances themselves. The phrase Bennington Triangle feels like it should be an old label, something local residents coined generations ago to describe a place they'd long considered unsettling. It isn't. The name was created in 1992 during a radio broadcast by Vermont author Joseph Citro. Citro had built a career collecting regional folklore and strange local history, and during one broadcast he needed a way to describe this cluster of disappearances to his audience. He borrowed the structure directly from a name everyone already knew. If the Bermuda Triangle worked, Bennington Triangle would too. By his own account, he essentially pulled it out of the air while sitting at his keyboard. That single naming decision did more to shape how this case is remembered than almost anything from the actual disappearances. Once the label existed, it invited comparison to a mythology that had nothing to do with Vermont. And the story started absorbing supernatural framing that the original cases never really had. Older local folklore didn't help either. The Abenaki people who lived in this region long before these disappearances had their own unrelated legends about Glastenbury Mountain, describing it as a place where four winds met in constant conflict, creating unpredictable and disorienting weather. That folklore existed independently long before 1945, but it gets folded into the modern retelling as if it were evidence. Strip away the branding and the borrowed folklore, and what remains is genuinely harder to dismiss than a themed ghost story. 5 real disappearances spanning 5 years in a specific, definable stretch of Vermont wilderness, involving people with almost nothing in common except where they vanished. No consistent cause, no consistent suspect. Search efforts repeatedly failed until in one case, investigators eventually discovered a body in a place that had already been searched. The name is recent. The mystery isn't. So let's go back to where we started. Where did the name Bennington Triangle actually come from? A single Vermont author, during a 1992 radio broadcast, borrowing the format of a much more famous mystery. What happened to each person? Middie Rivers separated from his hunting party and was never found. Paula Welden vanished during a hike despite a massive search. James Tedford disappeared from a bus between 2 confirmed stops. Paul Jepson vanished from his family's farm at just 3 years old. And Frieda Langer's body was eventually found in a location that had already been searched and cleared. Why does one case stand apart from the rest? Because Frieda Langer is the only person whose remains were ever recovered, and the place they were found had already been checked multiple times before her body appeared there. Do you think there's one single explanation connecting all 5 cases? Or do you think this was simply an unlucky overlap of unrelated tragedies in the same stretch of wilderness? Let me know what you think really happened. If you're into cases like this one, along with the SS by Chimo, the 1924 Everest disappearance, and the true story behind the Flannan Isles lighthouse keepers, this channel has full deep dives on each of them. So stick around, check those out next. And if you want more real unsolved mysteries like this, subscribe.